welcome to another interview in the USA section of the International College of Dentists project, Outstanding Leaders in Dentistry. Our guest this morning is Dr. George Selfridge, naval officer, educator, dean, executive director, and grandfather. Satch, welcome. I'm delighted to be able to sit here and talk with you about a wonderful career in dentistry.
Thank you, Dick. I'm enjoying the Washington traffic as well.
I'm going to take a little editorial license here as the person on the other side of the camera to say that for 35 years you've been my mentor. I can vouch that you truly are a leader in our profession, and thank you for coming from St. Louis to do this for us. Now, let's start a few years ago. Tell me about Pitman, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Pitman, New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that corrected, but well, that's where I was born and raised. I was born in my mother's bedroom. Didn't go to hospitals in those days. And one of 5 children. I have 3 sisters, 1 deceased, and a brother. My brother is a former executive president or vice president of Mobil Oil. He now resides in Florida. My other 2 sisters still reside in Pitman, New Jersey. It's a town of about 12,000 people, but in those days regional relative to education because of all the farm communities around it. Therefore, we had a diversified type of student body. And we had some big boys that played football and baseball. And so we were always up there in the area of being runners-up or champions for what they called Tri-County, which was a 3-county division of the educational system. And my mother and dad, and I had an aunt that lived next door. So it was quite a family escape area for people who were born and raised in Philadelphia. And it started out as a camp meeting town. It and still remains a Methodist camp meeting center. It's called the Grove area. It's built in a circle in the middle with the 12 avenues running off from it. And they were, as I say, it was oriented towards a summer vacation town. It had 2 natural lakes and still has 1. And the camp meeting continues to run every summer. And they have evangelistic services there relative. And it's a sort of a religion for everybody as far as that's concerned. That come there, and that's about the town. It's still a small town. Oh, and one other feature: it's never had a tavern in it. The bylaws say no, but the trucks deliver things like the dairy trucks do to the doors, so people managed to get what they need relative to that.
Tell me about Mom and Dad. What did Dad do?
My dad was a railroad conductor.
Okay.
Worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. My mother was a housewife. And in fact, I had 2 uncles that worked for the railroad. One was an engineer and then became very high in the Brotherhood. And then I had an uncle who was the head of the insurance division. And so we were truly a railroad family. I used to leave that town and ride all the way to New York with my dad and on the train all the way to D.C. and back again. And so we became very familiar with rail traffic and rail travel. In fact, I still enjoy it, and Ruthie and I are going to take the train from here to Philadelphia when we leave this next Saturday. So that's about it. Very supportive parents, very interested parents, and strong disciplinarians.
Before we get too far into this, and I'm not sure I have ever heard this story, knowing you all these years, where did the word Satch come from?
Well, I can partially tell you on camera. where it may have come from. It really started with my brother. My brother, no matter where you saw him, he had a satchel with him. And he picked up this name of Satchel, and then it got reduced to Satch, and then we were known as Big Satch and Little Satch. My brother lost the name, and I have maintained the name, so it's so that it kind of came up that way, and it lingers that way.
Okay, well, I'm glad to finally know that all these years. The days in high school, were they pretty good days for you?
Oh,
what
great.
do you recall about high school?
Well, I enjoyed it so much. I really tried to talk to my parents and letting me flunk my senior year, which I'm glad I didn't. But, you know, sports in a small town, and very much town supported. In those days, you know, the curriculums were rather simple, 5 majors a year if you were going to go into college preparatory. And then you had the business section, and then you had the people who were getting ready for trade. So from that standpoint, I think it was a cleaner curriculum than they have now. I look at the curriculums these days, and I look at about 300 ways people can escape academic confrontation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a shame. But that's the way it is, and I guess that's the way it will be. But in those days, it was a very set system that we worked with, and and when you were ready to go to college, you were ready to go to college, and that's what it was all about. And so I look back on it as I said, I had fun in high school. I enjoyed it, and still look and reflect on it with very, very pleasant memories.
Were there any of your teachers that were sort of role models that directed you the college way, or thinking about the profession of dentistry or anything like that?
Well, I've thought a lot about teachers that I had very close contact with. I had my teacher that mostly influenced me was in the 7th grade. And he, in those days, that was unusual to have a male teacher at that level of your education. But he was totally involved, and he mixed academics and sports activity, and he was also very, very friendly. In fact, my best friend and I used to almost visit him every Friday night at his home, and I guess looking back on it, I don't know how he tolerated us, or his wife tolerated us, but she did. And his name was George Boner, and he finally left the academic area and ended up being a director in the YMCA. I had very, very friendly teachers in high school, very, very interested teachers, but as far as influence, as far as dentistry is concerned, really came from a general practitioner in our town who went on and became an orthodontist, who is now deceased, but and his name was Jaggard. In fact, he dated my sister every once in a while. But he, visiting his office, and in those days, you know, the caries index were pretty high, so I had a lot of visits and a lot of time to talk to him. And he got 2 of us interested in dentistry. One was Jim Lepley, former naval officer, former head of the Memorial prosthodontic, maxilloprosthodontics. And so we both, and we lived right around the corner from one another.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah, and so he went to the University of Pennsylvania. Of course, I came through the V12 program.
Yes. Let's get you, though, from high school first to Gettysburg and Muhlenberg. Tell me how that all happened. Why'd you go there, and what was going on?
Well, Gettysburg, as you know, in Pennsylvania, there are many, many small church-related schools, Lutheran and et cetera. And they're all good pre-med, pre-dent schools, pre-med primarily. And the principal of the high school was a graduate from Gettysburg, and he got 2 of us interested in it. A classmate of mine from the time we started in 1st grade was a boy by the name of Bob Snodgrass. He grew up to be a hero in the Army and as well as in the hometown, and he never left the hometown. And he sort of became a mentor for other kids coming up. But anyway, Mr. Cooper, who was a principal of high school, encouraged us to go to Gettysburg. And so Hal Bream, who was the coach, came down and visited with us. Then we went up for a weekend and visited with them in Gettysburg. And in fact, both of us also had an opportunity to go to the University of Delaware, but we chose Gettysburg instead, and I'm glad we did. And I only spent 1 year there, but it was a year of great turmoil because at that time we were in the war, and we were encouraged to finish the year if we could, and we did. And I remember going into Philadelphia one weekend, and I came home and I enlisted in the Navy and was assigned a V-12 program. And that V-12 program ended up being in Muhlenberg. At that time, you know, the Army had ASP, and they had some of the colleges, and the Navy had some of the colleges. And so Muhlenberg was the V-12 college for pre-med and pre-dent. And so that's where I went relative to that.
Now, V-12 is maybe a unique term for some people that might view this. Tell us what the V-12 was.
There was, at that time, you had different programs. You had V-7, which was a general line type of preparation. You had V-5, which was aviation. These were all people who were in college or had the potential through different evaluation eliminations. And then you had V-12. V-12 were primarily in the staff, supply, medical, dental for the Navy. And so I went to Muhlenberg. I was there about 2 or 3 years, and I'll tell you an experience I had there. I graduated, and they decided I was going to be a midshipman. I was going to be assigned to midshipman school. And when I picked up my certificate of completion, they told me I was to go down to the yeoman's office, and they wanted to see me down there. So I did, and this was the old SALT type of, as you well know. And he said, you're not going to midshipman school, you're going down to Temple Dental School. And I said, but I don't have, he said, you don't have any choice, you don't have any say, that's where you're going. Well, I knew I was lacking 2 or 3 prerequisites, but I went. And I was there with another fellow by the name of Spicer, who's also in the Army and now lives in St. Louis, or in the Navy, and now lives in St. Louis. But the long and short of the whole situation was, after I was in Temple Dental School for 3 months, I got called by Dean Timmons, and he said, Satch, I want to tell you you're doing all right, but we've had a faculty meeting, and you just didn't have the prerequisites to come here. Why did you come? I said, because one big fat yeoman sent me. And so he said, well, I'm sorry, you'll have to leave. So I said, what's going to happen to me? Well, University of Pennsylvania at that time was a center for the academic levels of people in the service, in the Navy. So I went over there, and they were going to send me to the fleet. So I said, but I've already completed the prerequisites for going to midshipman school. Well, they wouldn't listen to me, so I had a friend who had influence in different areas, and I went and talked to him, and he said, well, let me see what's going on. And the next thing I knew, I was back in Muhlenberg in a 3-month course, 6 weeks late, going in organic chemistry and a scientific Greek and something else. So you know what organic chemistry is. Well, I happened to do fairly well on the first test. So the professor was encouraged by this, but from there it was a lot of, and I should give him all the credit in the world, he was very, very kind to me relative to organic chemistry. And then from there I ended up in the University of Buffalo.
So, yeah, I was going to ask you that next. How do you get to Buffalo? I mean, you had a shot.
By train.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, I got there because of the sequence. They were on a 3-year schedules.
Okay.
And they graduated in December and in July. And it was one of the schools that was open at this time, and I got out of Muhlenberg. It was like in October. So they sent me to boot camp, and then I became a dental apprentice in the dental clinic there. And then from there, I was forwarded on and sent on to the Buffalo, and graduated 3 years later.
And that was what, 1947?
That was 1947 when I graduated. I went up there in 1945. I was there when the war ended.
Okay.
And then we were there as V-12 support students for 2 years, and then the third year we were on our own because they had began to dilute those programs and finally abolished them.
Was there anything in your mind, and I don't know, you were a V-12 program with the dental apprentice, and little did you know that you would go in to become a 2-star admiral in the Navy Dental Corps, go back to the place as commanding officer that you did your internship. Any memories through that point?
Well, I can remember I had some tough bosses. I started my internship at Bethesda, and that was the first internship in the Navy. There were 6 of us, and they had the graduate program going on there, you know, for general dentists and some of the other specialties, and they kind of didn't know what to do with us. So we had a separate place for what subject material, cognitive material, as well as laboratory classes. We had them, but we were separated because the other general dentists, and they were, you know, some commanders and captains and all, they just didn't want 6 young interns in their classes with them. And but it all worked out very well, and so we left there. I left there after 6 months and ended up in St. Albans. And I ended up with a commanding officer named Jocko Walsh, who had graduated from University of Pennsylvania and been in the Navy since 1936. And this is another experience. Let's go back to Bainbridge. I was buffing his office one day, and he had one of those chairs that have, you know, that swivel and have 3 legs, and the buffer got caught between 2 of the legs. And I won't tell you what he said or what he yelled, but he was ducking and ducking, and the exec came in, pulled the plug, and that took me off the buffer. I didn't have to buff anymore. But who was the commanding officer at St. Albans but Jocko Walsh? And I walked in, and all he yelled was, "Hide that kid in the buffer." And I had Jim Bradley up there, who was he was a great surgeon and a guy who, but he expected you to be around. So I was around 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, believe me. But then I went from there, and then went on the USS Midway, and on the carrier, which was great duty. I've had 2 carriers. I was on the Randolph, and I was on the first carrier that had jets fly onto it, as jet squadrons, and just a marvelous experience on the carriers. You
had several other ships too.
Yeah, I had about a total of 11 years, one way or the other. Ended up though in being a staff dental officer for Servland and Subland, and very much involved with the line officers and their segments of specialties, and was able to appreciate what the aviation aspect was, what the Servland or the surface ships were, and certainly what the submarines were.
In 1961, you were Surface Force Atlantic Fleet Dental Officer on the USS Cadmus.
That's correct.
I recall that. I was a young lieutenant over there on the USS Amphion.
Yeah.
Now, but before we get to that point, you were at St. Albans as a second half of your internship, and then how did you get into the oral surgery area? And you
well, I had an awful lot of oral surgery exposure in the internship. And then I worked with Terry Mead at Florida for 2 years, he and Hal Green. So I got very much involved there. And then I got involved at Pax River with an oral surgeon who took me in down there as his assistant. So I was involved there, and I began to, you know, I guess be more of an exodontist than a strict oral surgeon, but suddenly I started getting hospital assignments, and so I ended up doing that. Now, my problem was I began to have back problems, and I ended up having laminectomies on my lower lumbar area and infusions, and so I just couldn't stand up in the OR for extended hours, and so that's where I kind of got sidetracked into administration.
Okay, so then in the the early 70s, you went back to Bethesda where you did your internship.
Yeah, and I became head of the audiovisual and correspondence courses, and I had what they call Satch's Sweeties working for me. I had 34 ladies working for me. And I just had wished many times that we could cycle them in and so everybody be on the same schedule, but that didn't work out. But anyway, that was a real great experience with those ladies, and in the correspondence course area, and in the course development, and also in the audiovisual support area. And so that was a real great experience. And at that time, we had those departments, and we had a very, very small library. So we began to work to build the library up for reference support, and so we could do med-large searches and things of that nature.
The correspondence course system that you developed there, and certainly sophisticated and increased in numbers, involved thousands of students throughout the world, if I recall.
Yes, user-friendly nations used them as well as our own forces. And I think at one time, I better not say, but I think at one time the Air Force was using them, but I'm not, don't quote me on that.
Okay, we won't, yeah. Okay, so now you've been to Bethesda the second time. Internship now, head of educational resources, audiovisual, and the library and so forth. And you got orders down south, if I recall.
Yeah. As
executive officer of the largest clinic in the world.
Yeah, and that was a strange assignment from the standpoint that I was told I was going to be leaving Bethesda, but I didn't know where. And about that time, Andy Anderson showed up, passing through, going down as to become CEO of the clinic there. And we were in Bob Elliott's house, and you know, Bob didn't keep many secrets. And he told Andy, he said, you know, Satch is going to be leaving Bethesda, and he says he really likes that Norfolk area. So Andy said something to me, and I said, yeah, I'd be very, very interested in that. So things progressed, and we were coming down to a decision, and Ernie Small, who was the surgeon at Bethesda, said he'd like me to come over to his house for lunch one day and bring Ruthie. And I said, well, Ernie, I'm leaving on leave on Friday. He said, well, then have lunch with us before you go. And he had proposed that maybe I would like to be his executive officer at Bethesda. But that didn't work out, as you know. And so I ended up going to Norfolk, and it was, to work with Andy was unbelievable. And so I really enjoyed that, but I was only there 9 months, I think, maybe 9 or 10 months when I was selected for Admiral. And then where was I going to go? So they ended up sending me back up to Bethesda. And I can remember we came up on a Washington's birthday shopping for a house because I didn't know what I was going to do with Ruthie at that time. And so we bought a home there on Washington's birthday. on a Washington's birthday sale, as is. But it worked out fine.
You've mentioned Ruthie a couple times. Before we take a short break, let me ask you some questions about your family. I know you mentioned Ruthie and mentioned the girls and mentioned the new generation. And just tell us what they're doing, how they're, where they live, and bring us up to date on your family.
Well, we have 3 daughters, and with very good planning, 4 years apart. So that helped tremendously with the education aspect. Pam is the oldest, and then there's Kim and Cheryl Beth. Pam lives in northern New Jersey. Her husband is the associate litigation officer for American Home Products. Very, very busy fellow. Travels more. Probably he'd be better off going to sea in the Navy than he is with the travel schedule he has. He goes across to England like you and I drive into Washington, D.C. or St. Louis. So he's a very busy fellow with all the different legal things that are going on in the chemistry world today, or the chemical world today, relative to medicines. Kim lives in St. Louis. Her husband works for what was called GET, and I think is Verizon now, the communication and customer relations. And then there is Cheryl Beth, who is the youngest, and she is the one that has the 2 grandchildren, Shelby and Kramer. And her husband is in the electrical business, electrical contractor. She still works and is a flight attendant with Continental Airlines. And so with her being with Continental Airlines, it's made it very nice for us in travel because parents get a certain amount of privileges that way. And so, but St. Louis is very ideally located because it's kind of halfway between Houston and New Jersey. So we have, from that standpoint, an advantageous position relative to communications and visits. So the family gets together twice a year. They'll be getting together in Nags Head for 2 weeks in June. And then we always have Christmas now comes for us December the 16th. And so if you have enough latitude and, you know, if you can take son-in-laws as best you can, which we do, we get along fine, then it's worked out real well. We have a very, very close and very, very happy family, and I credit a lot of that to Ruthie.
Now, Ruthie is also from Pittman, right?
Ruthie's from Sewell, New Jersey.
Oh, Sewell.
Which was one of the surrounding communities I told you that came into Pittman for high school education. And so our courtship was, well, of course, we didn't have automobile, or I didn't have an automobile available. So she lived about 4 miles away north of where we lived. So I could usually thumb it up there, but I'd catch the night train home at 12:30 at night. You know, I was probably the only passenger on it in those days. And so it worked out all right. Sometimes I would miss, and I'd sleep over at Ruthie's house. And the first guy that was becoming on the train as I was getting off was my father. And he'd say, "I'm going to talk to you later."
Okay, so you married a high school sweetheart.
I started dating Ruthie when she was 13.
Wow.
And she had skipped a grade, so she was a sophomore in high school, and I was a senior, and we stuck together.
That's been a few years ago.
52. 52 married. And then add onto that at least 6 years.
Yeah.
So
it's quite a record.
It's been a long relationship.
A wonderful relationship. Satch, let me go back now to Bethesda, because that was a critical time. And since I was there with you, to know some of the unique things that were going on in graduate education at that time that you instigated. And give me some of your memories of those issues.
Well, as you well know, and many others, that's a very, very unusual staff at Bethesda. All either board certified or board eligible. And I often said we had more boarded people there probably than any school in the country as far as contact type of hours that they put in. I was talking to a representative from GW one day, and he was out there, and I asked him what he was doing there, and he said that he was visiting with the chaplains and that they had a situation there where they were trying to develop a master's degree, and I don't know exactly what the master's degree was going to be in with the chaplains, but it kind of lit up a light bulb on me, and I said to him, well, could you develop something, a master's for our staff here? And he said, well, what are their backgrounds and how much of education did they have relative to postdoctoral? And so between the two of us, we sat down and figured out a curriculum in which they would get advanced credits for their academic involvement and could come up with a master's over a period of time. And we called it Monday Night Master Program because it was on a Monday night. The football people didn't like that too much, but that's when we had it. And we bought the professors out from, and it was going to be in higher education. And we brought the professors out, and I convinced them they could drive out the Beltway very easily, and this was going to be for health professionals. It wasn't just going to be restricted to our staff. And as a matter of fact, many nurses and other health-oriented individuals joined the masters over a period of time. And it was kind of a 360-degree cycle type of thing because you could opt in and opt out, but you could pick up your course again within a segment of time. And that developed, and so I think we had everybody on the staff ended up having masters. In addition to that, and I remember one fellow we sent down to the Air Force for their course down there, and he didn't know why he was gone, but he went and came back all enthusiastic. So we had that aspect of it, from course development and weights on courses and outcome assessments and things of that nature. And so we had, outside of the clinical and science aspect of our own profession, we had a staff that really had an appreciation for many other aspects of higher education. That also, I convinced them after I left here and went down to Norfolk that they could fly down there faster than they could drive around the Beltway. So we had a master's down there. Then there wasn't any in that area. So we had a lot of school teachers coming to that one, plus the health professionals. And we were able to utilize reference libraries, which are very, very important when you're running your master's programs. And we were able to contact one down there that was used by the academia community in Norfolk. And I believe, but I'm not sure of this, but about 2 or 3 years ago, due to your efforts, they set up a recognition situation with George Washington University. And I think over 800 people have gone through the Monday Night Master's program. And not strangely enough, but when our staff would leave to go out and get out of the Navy, and they walk in with that master's degree as well as their credentials in their own area of specialty, they had absolutely no problems getting on their staff and getting what they deserved relative to compensation. So I thought it was a great program, and it did work out nicely, and so I'm very proud of it.
Well, you ought to be, because as a graduate of that program, it was interesting sitting in the classes with school teachers, with nurses, wasn't just our dental staff, but it was a wonderful program. And I will admit to you, though, if it was a 2-year program every Monday night for 2 years, it got old maybe the second night, but it was other than. But thank you for doing that, because that was unique and still is going on, incidentally.
Of course, my punishment was I had to go through it, too.
Now, we got to get you to Washington University. You had such a fantastic career, from seaman recruit to 2-star admiral, but now you were looking something else to do. And the Washington University got into this. Tell me about that.
Well, you are very familiar with his name, Bob Koch, who was from St. Louis and who ended up being a 1-star admiral in the Navy, was on our staff at Bethesda. And I had a family, still rather young, and my youngest daughter was coming up in the 6th grade after about my 3rd year at Bethesda. And I was just absolutely sure within my mind, and Ruthie too, that we wanted her to go uninterrupted when she started in junior high school. Because it's very, very difficult for little girls to, more than for boys, to be lifted up from say a junior high school or a high school and try to get a niche within the community. So I had made it known that I was going to get out after 3 years at Bethesda. Bob Koch got a hold of, said to me, or came to me and said, you know, the dean is leaving at Washington University. Would you be interested in that position, or to apply for that position? And I said, well, yes, I would, but I'd have to know more about it. But Bob Koch had a mentor by the name of Bill Koch, who was the head of oral diagnosis and medicine at and also was going to be chairman of the search committee, who had conveniently a daughter that lived right here in Rockville. And so he would come in every Christmas to visit with her. So I got this phone call one day right around Thanksgiving, and he identified himself and said, could he get on a schedule for a visit? And I said, well, certainly. So he came in, and we spent 2 wonderful days together. And he left, and I guess it was along about February, they got a hold of me and asked me to come out for an interview. And I went out and had an interview, and then came back here, and about 6 weeks later, they invited me back again to go through the interview with the staff and the faculty, and offered me the job there, which was very challenging, because at that time capitation of students was there, and that was going to be going down the drain. Private institutions were very, very much in a struggle because of high tuition, and it also private schools were just kind of hanging in there. So it was a real challenge from that standpoint. So I ended up taking the job, and we did lose capitation, which was a great portion of our budget. We were able to still recruit very highly, and strangely enough, from the Oriental area, as in Hawaii and Southern Cal, and over in Taiwan, and even in Hong Kong, and also the Mormon community from Salt Lake City. And so what I was looking at different ways to attract people. Well, with I didn't have any problem with the Orientals, because they're very dedicated people. And during the war, St. Louis was one of the places that they were evacuated to from the coastal areas, and they were treated wonderfully well by the Midwestern people. And so they in response to that, they were very, very supportive of our school, those who went through it, and became extremely interested from all aspects, financial support, sending their children there, and et cetera. With the Mormon group, I knew that they had to go on sabbaticals, so I went out and talked with them and tried to figure out how we could set up a double degree program and also involving their sabbatical to go on their I can't remember what they call it. It's an assignment for a year where they go around recruiting new membership to the churches or to the church. So to make a long story short, we developed a 2-year a program that at the end of the second year at dental school, they would get their undergraduate degree, and then they would go on and finish up, and it worked out very nicely from that standpoint. And we didn't have any research going on, so I tried to figure out what we could do there, and we set up a program, Research Without Walls. We had the space, and other areas needed it, and we needed some postdocs on our staff in basic sciences. So that's the way we got through that and managed, and ended up having a very substantial amount of money from research coming into that area. So that's what was that's about the two things that I reflect back more than anything else in my experience there.
How many years were you there, Satch?
I was there about 10 and a half years.
10 and a half years. And you got to call St. Louis home, didn't you?
Well, yes, because as I said, it was a good halfway mark between the East Coast and Houston, because Sherry had pursued her area of interest with the Continental Airlines. Kim lived there, and Pam was on the East Coast, so it was convenient from that standpoint. And Missouri is, I hate to advertise it, is a great state. It's got a lot of natural rivers and lakes and great fishing, and now it has Branson, and St. Louis is a great town because it has the great football team and a wonderful baseball town. They never draw less than 38 or 39,000 people, even on Ladies' Day. And now the ice hockey team is on their way to being very challenging for the Stanley Cup, and they draw 20,000 people. So on a weekend in St. Louis, when they have a ice hockey game, a baseball game, and a football game, over 150,000 people will be in the different events and areas of interest, and it's a homey atmosphere. It's one that it has grown. The suburban area has grown. When we moved to Chesterfield, it had 3,100 people. Today, it's a city of 44,000, and so those type of developments and the rolling of the city, inner city, out to the suburbs has been a very, very wonderful thing. And they now have great hospitals and wonderful golf courses and things that before had sort of been laying dormant, or lying dormant.
After the 10 great years as dean, you then sort of redirected your skills into another area with the American Board of Orthodontics.
Well, that was interesting. Earl Shepard, who's done one of these interviews, incidentally, was known as Mr. Orthodontics, who was really, he settled the AAO in a building there that he leased himself, and that was the beginning of that association there. Now they have a beautiful 3-story building. He was a professor emeritus from the school, and I knew he and his wife socially, and Ruthie, and he was one of the stabilizing factors for me to go out there in the very beginning. And anyway, he came to me and said he was at that time executive director of the American Board of Orthodontics, and he said, "You know, Satch, I'm beginning to know that things are getting beyond me relative to things that have to be done. And would you be interested in becoming executive director of the American Board, or be a candidate for it?" And I said, "Well, Earl, yes, I would. I just don't know that much about it. You know, I'm not an orthodontist." And so I said it might draw some criticism relative to the AAO, American Association of Orthodontics, as well as a Council of Dental Education, as well as the American Board of Orthodontics. And he said, "Well, I'd like to put your name in." Jack Dale, who's going to be appearing on this program in June, was the chairperson of the search committee. And anyway, they decided that I would come out for an interview. And the president of the board called the interview the Friday after Thanksgiving, if you can imagine. So here these fellows came in. They were not too happy. And but we had a very, very cordial interview, but I didn't think it was going to go anywhere because an attitudinal situation relative to the inconvenience that they were caused coming out on that Friday. But about a month later, I got a letter from Jack and asking me if I were still interested, would I be willing to sit down and talk about what it would take and et cetera. And I said yes. And so I did. And it really turned out to be a real challenge. At that time, the examination was in a blue book, you know, and it was torn up and mailed all over the country and to the different directors and et cetera. It was not one that really, it was all subjective. So I brought over the fellow who was my curriculum advisor and designer and et cetera with the school, PhD in test and measurements, and as a consultant. And we sat down and worked out a 10-year plan in which everything, including the subjective materials, would become objective. And that was quite a challenge. At the end of 5 years, we had met from the cognitive standpoint our goal of objective testing. I found out that most of the senior residents go to the AAO meeting in the spring as a part of their deal with their departments. And so I said, well, why don't we have what they call phase 2? When they go to that, they're already graduated. And so we tried it. And we had 90 the first year, and within 3 years, we had everybody graduating from their program coming for the phase 2. And it never got in their way. And it also was reciprocal with 14 states from the cognitive standpoint if they had to go and take a state board. And in addition, it has now become, for many schools, a comprehensive exam for getting out of their graduate program. So that worked out real well. Now, how do you take a subjective material like examining cases in which you look at 10 cases as a director, and you bring somebody in and orally you test them on their cases as well as their decision for the cases and their outcomes. So I said to Deemer, I said, you know, there's only one way we can make this objective, and that is make the grading system objective. So that's what we did. So we started 2-day calibrations for examiners, and we had them come in, and they went through the routine, and then they had to the parameters for any of their questioning and grading was on the score sheet, and they couldn't go off in different tangents. And Deemer would visit as they were doing these interviews, and so it ended up that it's turned out to be an objective instrument for them, and they have just in 10 years we had it put together. And the way we did with scoring, we went to the ADA, and they have PAR tests and PAR scoring, and we sent the directors up there, and they were introduced to the system, and then Deemer could reinforce them in the system, and now they have test banks and all the other aspects of that, which was an interesting challenge and very enjoyable.
Okay, now we've talked a little bit about your Navy career, which was magnificent, and your deanship and your executive directorship. Let's go to the International College for a moment here, because I call you Mr. ICD. I think it's next year we celebrate the 20th anniversary of an idea that you had on continuing education. You're a master of the ICD. You've won the Spark Plug Award. You've gotten citations from the president. You work on the convocation committee. I mean, I don't know what else you could do. But this CEC has just generated so many loyal people coming back year after year. Tell me how that got going.
Well, I have to certainly include Bill Hawkins. I was in Phoenix for a meeting, and he called me up and said he'd like to talk, and I had dinner with him, and we got talking about continuing education and how we could make it different and more attractive for people to attend. And we decided that the thing to do would be, first of all, we wouldn't pay anybody any honorariums. And everybody we said that to said, well, you're never going to get it off the ground. Secondly, we wanted to have it at about the same time every year. Thirdly, we wanted it to be family-oriented, family-friendly, so that when people came and they had the free time, we could set up different areas of interest for them to visit throughout the different aspects that our country has to offer. Having done that, we tried it. We ran the first one in St. Louis, and we had, I think it was about 60 people there. I had brought some of the staff from the ADA, but primarily we ran a TMJ seminar with our faculty as being the mentors. And it went over very well. We got them. Some people have never been to a big league baseball game, and that went over big. And certain aspects of the river, we took advantage of the river and went on a cruise on the river. And so what we try to do was make it, well, then we had the next one, and I can't remember where they have all gone, but we've gone from that small number. We now have about 170, 180 people that come, and some of them bring their children, and we've been able to manage that. We have not given an honorarium to any of the faculty or the clinicians. But what we do, instead of that, we donate in their names a very nice sum into anything that has to do with academia, higher education, or whatever, and it's given to them in an unrestricted form so that they can do with it what they wish. And so, as you know, the people that have come have been on submarines, they've been to the Top Gun school, they've had the San Diego Zoo, they had the Williamsburg, and then they went up to Mackinac Island, and a very cordial group. And surprising enough, I start getting calls around April, where are we going, what time should I be there, and that type of thing. And so it's coming into St. Louis next year, yeah.
Well, it's been a magnificent program, and I find that people that have met from around the country now get together at other times because of the friendships that they've developed at that. And it also is continuing education approved by the American Dental Association.
Yes,
and it's
continued by CERP,
high quality
continued
stuff.
education, right. And so, and you well know because you have been involved in writing up the specs for CERP recognition, and it's a very specific but very a challenging type of thing to do to get them to approve things, but we've been able to do it up to this point.
I must mention here, though, and when we talk ICD, that you were the international president of the college worldwide, and traveled extensively, passing the word and creating programs for various sections throughout the world, Operation Outreach for books to the Philippines and things of those nature.
You know, that was, I think, 10 tons of books. 5,000 books went to the barefoot dentist of the Philippines. And we ran 2 days of seminars over in the Philippines, which developed into a 1 week type of thing in Indonesia, in developing courses for the enlisted personnel and other people that came. And I know you went over there on one of those to be involved with that. And that we worked with the Minister of Education on that, and so that was a very rewarding program from the standpoint of going from a virgin thing into something that really has developed into something very substantial.
It really has, and it sort of meets the goals of the ICD that had been started in 1920.
That's right.
And these things that you developed have certainly impacted upon the colleges worldwide. In fact, that particular program, you got the award of the Philippine Islands given to you for that program, which is significant in my mind anyway, of recognizing how you can help people that don't have what we have.
Well, it is, and I don't think people here have the appreciation for the situations there, and I think it's something that we've got to continue to do within our scope of expertise, and so yeah, I'm very proud of that.
Let me just mention a few things that I think are important. You've been in the community. You've been extensively busy. You've been an alternate and a delegate to the American Dental Association on through the years. You've been very active also in the American College. You've been the Man of the Year of Buffalo. You've gotten the Legion of Merit from the Navy and commendations from all the way up to the President. There's just many too extensive to mention, and of course, member of all those organizations that some of us joined because you've really impacted and worked in those organizations. If you look back at all of those things, would you do that all over again?
Oh, yes. I think so. It's been, for me, an outlet after I got out of the mainstream of different things. Excuse me. But I also had a wife that supported it.
Yeah.
And that was very important. And she still does.
If you got a knock on the door next week from a young man or young woman that says, I'm thinking of dentistry. Doctor, you've been in it a few years. Would you recommend that I try to go to dental school and go into the profession of dentistry at this time?
Oh, yes. I think the profession has just a wonderful future. As you well know, we have been losing about 500 graduates a year since many of the schools shut down and many of the classes have become smaller. Now, they have not picked up. We also now have in the manpower of dentistry going to school, I think we have about 40% plus of female dentists. So what you try to do is equate with what's going on in scientific and technical development and look and see where this is all going to come together and what does it look like relative to manpower. And I predict that in the next 10, 15, 20 years that the manpower in dentistry is going to be short. Now the manpower on the medical side is excessive. So what effect will territorial treatment have relative to that? I'm not too sure. But I tell you, it's an exciting thing because with the genetic situations coming down, the type of microbiology, the emphasis in technology, and I think we're going to have a reduction in like non-surgical because we now can treat different things with antibiotics and new type of treatment modalities that are going on. And so here we are, we got a shortfall of manpower, but we got an explosion in areas that still are untouchable. I mean, it's like finding a gold mine from the standpoint of income. So how the manpower is going to be generated, how it's going to be allocated, what avenues are going to be open. But I think as we come down the line here, more and more money is going to be given to Medicaid for at least children's dentistry, pediatrics. You're going to have more involvement with Medicare as far as identification of dollars for dentistry. So, and then put on that the technical developments. How many people do you think going in and having their teeth whitened, one way or the other? And that's become a very, very heavy income factor for the dentist, but it also opens up other avenues of dental situations that the patient didn't even have any realization for. So you got a whole group out there think nothing about but aesthetics. And aesthetics, for example, in putting retainers in for orthodontics, they're now done in acrylic. They're blended, or you can have them all different colors. They can match your earrings. You know what I'm saying? People have become aesthetically conscious. And so you got that aspect that has to be looked at. So yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. I don't know whether as a student I could keep up with it all, but relative to dentistry is going to become more cognitive from the standpoint of academia. It's going to become more astute to new technologies. The curriculums are going to have to be changed and not waste a lot of different times in some of the exercises that go on now, because there are others that are taking its place. You're going from surgical innovation to non-surgical techniques. And so if he came into me, I think I could convince him very easily that it would be a good way to make a living. And incidentally, I do have some come. I have some come in. I got 2 or 3 in Annapolis and 1 or 2 in Mary Force that I interviewed for. And I'm excited about youth. They're not all bad.
Well, they're good. They're good. Well, looking over a 50-year career in dentistry, approximately, plus or minus a couple, what do you personally want to be remembered for? What could you say that this has been all worth doing? It's a tough question.
Well, it is. Good husband, good father.
Can't beat that.
And that's hard to get. But when I look back on a question like that, or try to, in my mind, conjure up an answer, I've had such a different career, and you too, that we didn't have an opportunity to become bored. Mm. We didn't have repetitious of, you know, and I think that's important. And every avenue that you got into gave you new and different challenges. And so I think from that standpoint, I couldn't reflect on any of them. I could take some factors out of each one of them, but, you know, I didn't enjoy being away from home, but I loved the carriers and sea duty. I didn't enjoy having duty every night, 7 out of 24 and all that stuff, but, you know, I did it, and so does everybody else. If you're, and you do it, and it's part of life. I look at the factors that I see. I guess I always try to tell the kids, when you see a door open, go through it, because there's something on the other side that might be very, very interesting to you. And I can't reflect back. Oh, you know, you have problems. I don't know anybody that can have more problems than a deanship in these days, but they're challenging. You may, if you can get answers to 30 or 40% of them, why, you can probably say you're successful. My time at Bethesda was a dream. I mean, to be surrounded by all that academic intelligence and all the things that those fellows and girls were doing, and in research, and it was just, I would go home every night and I could sit down and have a nice dinner and think of, boy, this has been a great day. Very seldom did I ever go home from Bethesda and said it was a terrible day, because I didn't experience that. As far as the dental, the dean job, it was in itself was a challenge to make sure that a private school could survive against state support and state schools relative to how much magic you can get out of a dollar bill. And I won't get into all that, but that was the big challenge. were you wasting anything? Did you waste anything? You couldn't waste anything. And then you look at that youth that comes through there, and on the end, they're going to have $100,000 looking at them before they see their first patient. Yet they're enthusiastic about it. And then with the board, I explained the challenge there was taking a very, very subjective thing and making it very objective, and had great guys on the board to work with. They weren't there just because they were nice guys or because they were being honored. They came and they worked, and no question about it. They worked hard, and they worked all year at different things. And so it too was, in a way, a different experience with a different type of individuals. But I think you can go into an area and work not having an appreciation for something, but not knowing all the ins and outs, like in orthodontics. But I sure learned classification of occlusion all over again, and things of that nature. But that too was it was a part-time job with full-time commitment.
Full-time commitment.
So that was interesting. You just like to stay busy, and I enjoyed it. ICD, of course. It has been a wonderful experience. I look back on just wonderful people that were in it and worked in it. And, for a volunteer organization, they work hard, and they make it run. What we have over 9,000 people in the ICD now, and over 5,000 in the USA section, and recognized throughout the world. It was just wonderful. So I can't answer you specifically, but I can certainly answer in generalities relative to the career. And I have had a nice one.
As you know, Satch, these tapes, when they're completed, are kept at the ICD Visiting Scholar Room at the National Museum of Dentistry in Baltimore, which is supported heavily by the ICD. So we've had a wonderful time. Admiral, Dean, educator, executive, father, and husband. grandpa. And the effort that you made to come in from St. Louis, we appreciate very much. And
well, I'm glad I could make it there for a while. It's been a bad year for me from the health standpoint, but there again, things went well. A nice thing about that is I didn't suffer a lot of pain, but I sure, beforehand, I sure know what having your sternum split and your laminectomies done and all the aspect of that, and having the paddles put on you to make sure your heart rates were correct. But that's been in itself been a year of experience that I don't think I really want to go through again.
Yeah, hope not.
But and it remains a challenge for me in many respects. So. But the Lord willing, and the creek doesn't rise, we'll might be around for a while.
Thank you, Satch.
Thank you very much. Same here.